a lot of the now adoption of AI in VetPath is low-hanging fruit, as it were. So the tasks that are easy enough to implement that are very time-consuming, because that's the other issue with veterinary diagnostics, is couriers and postage. The main delay is getting that sample to the lab. So as I see it, a lot of these on-site scanners, that's going to change the field quite a lot. If your integration isn't fast or real time, can you offset the results or can you not? Because if you can't offset the reporting of those results, then you need something quicker, don't you? So I think it has a major impact on which model you're thinking of designing, how it fits in with your workflow. And I think that's something quite critical to consider before you go ahead with doing a model. To me, integration is critical.
Welcome, my digital pathology trailblazers. Today, my guest is Dr. Richard Fox, and he is a veterinary diagnostic pathologist specializing in histopathology and cytopathology. He's also working as a pathologist for Aiforia, an AI image analysis company that is sponsoring this episode. So thank you so much to Aiforia for being the sponsor of the episode. And I am always super excited when I have a veterinary pathologist on the show, because I feel like we are such a niche pathology specialty that I always get excited when, we talk about veterinary pathology and how it's not super like the pathology skills that we have are pathology skills, and then they're being applied to veterinary pathology. And I think not everybody gets that, but welcome, Richard, to the show.
Pleasure.
How are you today?
I'm very good today. Yeah. I've got quite a few tasks ticked off this week, so I'm feeling a bit more positive about the weekend. So
good. So you're in a good mindset for in a good space to be here today. So let's start with you. Tell the digital pathology trailblazers about yourself and how you got to where you are currently in your career. So the path towards pathology and veterinary pathology. Tell us about that, but also then about the transition to Aiforia and getting engaged in the AI space for pathology.
Sure. Yeah, I qualified as a vet from the Royal Veterinary College in '98. That's a long time ago. So I spent a couple of years as a mixed practitioner, doing small and large animals.
Me too.
Yeah, and I decided. I think my main decision was it was about 2:00 in the morning, lying in farmyard muck in the snow, trying to carve a cow with a jack on. The cow went down and went. No, I think this is it. I think I need to find something a bit more mentally challenging rather than physically challenging. So I always liked pathology as an undergraduate. I think I was one of the minority that liked pathology, and certainly like histopath. And then during my time in clinical work, I actually I did all the cytology on premises. So I developed the lab there doing cyto. So I think it was a natural progression. I was obviously interested in the cytology part of it. So I think I made a decision to do a residency at Liverpool University. So I did that for 3 years and did a lectureship there with doing veterinary pathology and doing skin pathology. Then I think I decided that academia, I didn't have a PhD. I wasn't a big research person. I was much more I think I still liked helping animals directly. So diagnostics was the sort of main focus, I guess, really. And then I moved into private diagnostic practice, which I've been in for 22 years now in various companies. I do mostly small animals, so dogs and cats, but a few other bits and bobs. So histopath, cytopath, we're doing immunohistochemistry as well. So that's been my main, I guess, focus for that time. But then I think your career sort of the challenge starts to plateau a bit. And you think, is there something more? I enjoy doing my diagnostics, but is there something else to challenge me? And then you start looking around, and then the opportunity came along we started doing an AI project at Fin Pathologist, where I currently work, looking at mast cell tumors. So at that point, we outsourced our Ki67 index for canine mast cell tumours because it's quite laborious, and we didn't do it in house. So then we thought, well, maybe AI could help us do that. So quick quantification of Ki67 positive mast cells has been shown to be prognostically significant. So can we get machine learning to do that for us?
Because you already do IHC in the house, right?
Yes. So we did a full spectrum of IHC at Finn. So we did all the immunophenotyping of lymphomas and obviously melanomas, all that sort of stuff. So we were already set up for that. So really all we needed to do was to employ AI. So we had the rest of the workflow kind of implemented already. So the decision was to obviously see what's out there in the market, and we ended up deciding on working with Aiforia, mostly because.
Why did you decide to? Yeah, exactly.
Well, I would say the main decision probably was, as veterinary pathologists, we don't have a lot of time to spare. So could we free up enough pathologist time to spend annotating and doing it ourselves? So we either do it on-prem and do it ourselves and annotate it ourselves, or is there the ability to have that model done for us with collaboration? So I think the main thing was that was our criteria, because we didn't have we have to have a fast turnaround time in vet diagnostics, and we have a lot of work. So freeing time up for a pathologist to do it, that wasn't decided as high priority. So we looked at Aiforia because they were offering what we call a CAS project. So we employ technologists and technicians and scientists at Aiforia to develop that model for us with close communication and obviously establishing a ground truth. So that's where
they do have veterinary pathologists working in their team as well, right?
Yes. So obviously myself at Aiforia now, Anna Kaiser is a veterinary pathologist there as well. So so there, and at the time we had other pathologists. Some have obviously subsequently left, but they had other vet pathologists there that helped us with that as well. So that's kind of how I got into the AI. But the only trouble with fitting in AI in veterinary diagnostics is time. So I wanted to do more AI, but we didn't have the time to give me. So then I decided to split my role between the two so I could get more experience in doing AI work. So essentially that's how I got into working for Aiforia. I applied for their job, and through subsequent many interviews I eventually got the position. So that's kind of how I've got into AI. I suppose from my background, I'm actually a photographer as well. So I do a lot of
oh, really?
And landscape photography. So imagery has been...
Actually, I did see your website. I did. Because you have it linked on LinkedIn, right?
Yeah, that's it, yeah. So I've been doing that for 12 years now. So I've been doing a lot of landscape photography, and so imagery and colours have always been part of my life, I suppose. And digital images a major part, because at Finn we became fully digital on Histopath 8 years ago. So we did it quite early.
Oh. Oh my goodness! Congratulations.
Yeah, so I was employed at Finn. I changed my jobs, and I was actually employed to help digitize Finn pathologists with 2 other pathologists. So we were the guinea pigs.
And that was, which year was that?
That was 8 years ago. So
it's gonna be 2016.
Yeah, 2016. That's when 2016.
Congratulations. I want to emphasize that because that's very early in terms of the digital pathology adoption.
Yeah.
And I sometimes give this presentation where I show the digital pathology timeline, and I'm always emphasizing that before there was an FDA clearance for a human pathology lab, veterinary pathology labs were already digitized, and it was the same system. So the clearance was for Philips IntelliSite, and IDEX was using the same system. So I don't know what systems you guys were using.
Yeah.
But
And I think the main reason for us digitizing was recruitment, because it's trying. I mean, there aren't
Yes.
very many veterinary diagnostic centres around. So if you're a sort of middle-aged pathologist with children, moving from one area to another is not easy, is it? So I think that the main reason, certainly why Finn decided to digitize, was to allow easier recruitment, because you could get off-site workers then. So I think that was critical, and we increased our pathologists, quite considerably just by going digital, so that they didn't have to move. So we've kind of had a 50-50 split. But since COVID, I think a lot of people have actually enjoyed working away from the office, and
Yes.
we have more remote workers now than we had, because before we had a lot of on-site, kind of a 50-50 split, really.
And it's also, I think it's a mental and societal shift for this to be accepted and now like required by people who are being approached by recruiters, right? I know it is my requirement. Okay, if I get a potential job offer, my first question is it remote? If not, we don't need to waste time talking about it.
Yeah.
So it is now a huge driver of being competitive in the market, just being digital for pathology, for digital pathology.
I mean, I do miss the interaction. I do miss the interaction of people. It's a lot easier. It's nicer to interact with people than it is working off-site. But then you get a lot more work done off-site because you have less distractions and less interruptions. So it's a real balance, isn't it, really?
I moved all my interactions to digital, to Microsoft Teams. Oh my goodness, like I call people, I send them screenshots. I'm like interacting with more people than I used to when I was on site.
That's true.
And but it's something, that comes kind of with what tools you started working with. And then obviously there's like probably the generations of pathologists after me, they're not that digitally native in terms of other tools than just viewing the digital images. And people who are younger than me, it's going to be like, they're going to blow our minds.
The younger pathologists will just be normal.
Yes. I recently talked to a colleague's daughter. My colleague is a veterinary pathologist as well, and her daughter is 13. In terms of like technologies, information, you talk to a 13-year-old like to an adult, and you can ask questions and like detailed information about technologies and like really better than people a lot older. So this is an interesting shift as well.
Okay, I mean, you do
Mhm.
most of your learning when you're very young, aren't you? You absorb it like
right
when you're young.
and
It's not difficult to learn, is it?
it was funny. I was talking to her and she was like, I'm like, how do you even know that? And she's like, we have internet. I'm like, yeah, I have internet too, but I guess I didn't have it when I was 13. So that's the difference. Yeah. So that was an interesting interaction. Okay. So that's interesting. So first thing that's interesting and, relevant to our conversation. I mean, it's a relevant conversation in general, but the first thing, okay, you decided you needed AI to help you in the diagnostics, but you didn't have the capacity to do it. So there was an option to outsource it, and there was an option to work with a highly specialized team in your specialty, right? With also fellow veterinary pathologists and with a team that's used to doing these projects. So this is something that Aiforia offers. And that's an excellent intro to AI for people who actually have to keep doing their job and keep like contributing in their current position. But you are so fascinated that you decided to spend more time doing AI. So like you guys decided to outsource or selected your use case for the Chi 67. And so can you explain how important this selection was or is in general in veterinary pathology, specifically for diagnostics? So did you need to develop it from scratch, or is there already a wide selection available? How does that work in the diagnostic space?
I think we're in a state of flux at the moment because AI is still in quite a youthful stage. I think the idea, I mean, certainly with my experience at Aiforia, is that, obviously we're developing a lot of models, we're developing a lot of demos and things like that. But there comes a point where you think, can I use this previous annotations and training to what we call transfer learn into other situations where those models actually might perform quite well, but on different tissues. So, but at the moment, certainly in the sort of vet area, I mean, obviously we do KO67 quite a lot in the human field. So, that's quite established from an AI point of view, but obviously from a veterinary point of view, we're still in very preliminary stages. So, obviously humans don't really get mast cell tumors very often, whereas dogs get mast cell tumors quite a lot. So there wasn't really that any of those developed models, certainly for mast cell tumors, that have been previously made by Aiforia. So we had to start from scratch. So this was a new model that was developed for us. The result of that is, well, there was two stages. We developed quite a nice model, and it was working nicely, and we were getting everything together. And there was a few months delay, and this ties into the QC part that I wanted to talk about, was that you make quite a few mistakes and you learn from them. So in our wet lab procedures, because we all thought, oh, it's AI can do everything, AI is brilliant. Well, it's only as good as the data that you put into it. So our model was working nicely. There was a few months delay, and then we restarted the project, and then we realized the model wasn't working very well. And we were like,
what happened?
What the hell's going on here? What's changed? Something's changed. So we looked back, the immunohistochemistry protocols hadn't really changed, sectioning, all that sort of stuff. But we realized that we'd changed from glass cover slipping to tape cover slipping. And because the thickness of the cover slip and then refractive index was different, the results of the scanning was different. So the model was not performing well. So we had to then retrain the model because we changed the wet lab procedure. So my experience of QC has been founded by the errors or oversights that we made to that. And the knock-on effect of that is that we then realized that maybe our immunohistochemistry wet lab procedures weren't optimized either, because we were using a pressure cooker, and the KO67 results were coming out quite variable because we realized that the pressure cooker wasn't consistent. So the antigen retrieval wasn't consistent. So sometimes the KO67 would come out really strong and sometimes quite weak. So the QC part of our IHC run was suboptimal as well. So we finally kind of realized that we really need to drill down on our wet lab procedures, because the KO67 is quantitative, it's not subjective. It's not often like immunohistochemistry is it? Is the antigen present? Oh, it's a melanoma. It's how much of that, or how many
you
of those
actually have to count it.
Yes. And so because it becomes quantitative, your QC becomes extremely important, because it's just not it's not binary, it's quantitative. And so that's where my sort of background, so I kind of wanted to talk about it, and I've written a white paper on it, which hopefully we'll link.
We're going to link to this paper in the show notes.
To think about, because people go, one question that people ask is like, what should I do? We want to do AI. What do we do? And I think that the first step is
make good slides.
Yeah, you need your sort of upstream QC needs to start thinking about that. And I'm speaking to other potential new clients recently, and it's just like some premises are multi-center premises, but they're all doing different. They're all sectioning differently. They're all staining slightly differently, and you think, well, maybe before you start selecting your training data, you need to collaborate and get a common, like almost like a ground truth for your wet lab procedures. Because if you don't have that consistency, then you get massive variability in your data set. So training is more difficult. And also, if you're using different scanners and different wet lab procedures, the results from the AI are going to be different unless you train more and make that model more robust, if you sort of mean. So it requires more training because you've got such variability. So from my experience, at Finn, when we were trying to develop our model, is that, there are an awful lot of things that you can do before you start implementing your AI to make that model perform better.
So, because, when you go digital just for visual assessment, it doesn't really matter that much because you're basically like digitally reproducing what's on glass. And you can read through a lot of artifact and still have a diagnostically okay specimen. But then the moment you want to automate something with a tool that relies on the image properties, and it's interesting because, the different scanner is kind of like everybody thinks about that. Different IHC, everybody thinks about that. But I think it's the first time I heard about, okay, we did glass cover slipping and then we switched to tape. And I mean, it's logical. It's one of the parameters, but it's one that, I've just heard less frequently.
But it's the same scenario.
Right. Just like a different point in your workflow.
Yeah, and it's about training. So the more training you do over a wider variability of your data set, the more robust the model will be. But obviously, we didn't train with that new cover slip. So that model wasn't robust enough to deal with.
Did it take a lot of adjustment to have the model perform again, or just a few examples was
We
enough?
decided to do a new version. Primarily, I think.
Okay.
If it was just that, I think it was probably just a tissue annotation. You could probably put new backgrounds in and things like that. However, because we'd also got new scanners because they were becoming end of life, so we had new scanners, and then we changed our IHC. So what we decided to do was actually just pause, sort our wet lab procedure out, sort our scanners out, then we started again. So it added a delay, but we thought the best thing to do, because so many things had changed, was actually just to do the same model, same slides, but just retrain it from scratch.
But did you use the previous version and then adjust it, or did you totally start from scratch?
No, because we felt that so much had changed that it would probably be better to start from scratch. I think if one thing had changed, if it was just cover slipping, I think you could probably just added more training to the previous model. But I think in this instance, so many things had changed, we decided no, we won't. But yeah, I think if the changes were minor, you could just add extra training on top of it, and I think it would have been fine.
And if you know exactly, okay, this is the change in this part of the workflow and this is how it influences, but then before you have your wet lab or just the lab part locked down, then probably it's you would have ended up like retraining 3 times instead of just one time when you had everything locked down.
Which, would have been not cost effective either, because obviously we were outsourcing that. So I think, all in all, that's why we decided just to do it again and wait till we had all of our wet lab procedures, as you say, locked down, and then go forward with it. But I think if we'd had everything fine and it was just one change, I think, just adding more training to the original model would have been absolutely fine. So, but it was just sort of to highlight that, there are important factors to consider. Because like you said, when you scan in a slide, the human brain is so adaptable. It can see through all of the artifacts. It can, it's got great, you've got experience. You know what is an incidental lesion. You know what, because you've learned it over years and years and years of training. Well, it's the same with the AI, but if you've only trained it for a week, it's not going to have the same ability as a pathologist that's been trained for 20 years, is it? So I think training is directly proportional.
Yes. So now it's working, right?
Yeah.
And you're using it. How do you monitor that it keeps working? Like, do you have a procedure
Yeah.
to keep it in check so that you catch immediately when something changes? What's your approach to that?
So that was going on to my next point, is that we decided that
Yes.
obviously what we were trying to do is replicate a human eyeballed test, which is quite subjective and prone to variability, because we all know about pathologist variation. We were trying to replicate that. And did we have sufficient faith that we were replicating it in the same way? Have we got a bias? Do we have, is our scoring higher than the references for KO67 scoring? Are they lower? We decided that maybe that we didn't have that confidence. So what we decided to do was an outcome study. So we had a cohort of nearly 200 cases of animals that have been treated for mast cell tumor. We analysed all of those tissues with our new model, and then we look at all statistics, which we're actually hopefully presenting at ESTP this year. We found a very strong correlation, obviously, with KO67 and outcome, so overall outcome and tumour recurrence. So it did actually force us to do, a validation of that model to see, because obviously you would assume that the model was doing the same thing as a human, but can you actually say the same? So we basically did regression analysis, and we actually found a very, very strong correlation, perhaps more than in the human papers, because of the consistency of the AI. And it's not subjective, as subjective. So that was very important for us to do that, and that gave us a great deal of faith that we were doing the right thing and we were getting good results. And that knocks on to how do we monitor the performance of this model? So I guess we have to think about quality control implementation, like you would do with a biochemistry analyzer or a hematology. You've got to standardize it. You've got to then monitor that that machine, essentially it's a machine at the end of the day, isn't it, doing a test, is that wandering off your acceptable parameters. So we've had to come up with an idea of how we're going to monitor the performance. I think monitoring IHC is quite difficult because unless you had the same test slide every time, how are you going to monitor your IHC? So that's always been a bit of a question as to how you monitor your quality control and your immunohistochemistry. I don't know how anybody else does it, but that's an important question, but it remains unanswered in my brain. But the other thing you can do is obviously quality control your scanning and your other. You can monitor your output of the model, the platform, and your scanning by using a test slide. Obviously, we have two scanners, but although they are QC'd and they are standardized, they don't come up with the same results because they are two physically different scanners. So the results are slightly different. So the idea was to use a test slide and use a weekly run and you look at the metrics that you get from the results of those and monitor that every week that you're doing the test. So if you're running the KO67 every week, you can use a QC.
You have to do the slide, check if it's...
So you run your analysis on the slide,
cool.
You get your numerics back, and then I think you probably have to establish a baseline and then see if it's wandering off. Is it within tolerances? If it's within tolerances, that's okay. But it also allows you to think, if it goes right off, you think something's changed. So has the scanner gone out of calibration? Has something happened to your wet lab procedures? So I think those quality control measures are very important, whatever machine you're using, because you have to have faith that the results that you're getting, which directly are going to affect the treatment that your patients are going to have. So if your KO67 went really high, sky high, artificially, they're going to have potentially a lot more intervention, costly intervention, like chemotherapy or further surgery or whatever, in further imaging, and that's going to have a bearing on it. So I think you do have a responsibility to quality control those tests that you're doing.
But what a great and very straightforward way of doing this, because the pushback I often hear is like, oh, when do you reversion? How many pathologists do need to annotate? Like, how much more resources do you need to put into maintaining the use of this algorithm that you already put so much resources into developing?
Yeah.
And this thing is, you do the work once, it's super simple. If something is off, you check, okay, what has changed?
I think that's the difference between, in some CRO type situations, you've got a drug development. You've got one situation where you've got a cohort of lab animals. You need a model to run once over that whole, and you as a one use model,
Yes,
which is fine, isn't it? Because the trouble is when you start going on long term models, the problems with drift become quite magnified, don't they? That the longer you use it, you can have sample drift, you can have something changes in your population of animals, something changes over time. You've got the possibility of drift in wet lab procedures, scanners getting older, all those things. So I think maintaining long-term models is much more of a challenge than just a one-off project AI model, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're finding in obviously the human side, because they want to be using those long-term. But the other thing is that the classification of tumors and grading changes, so you end up having to add additional grading criteria to that model. So that model needs updating, but then you have to revalidate. So
that is
you
true.
still have to establish.
You cannot escape it.
No, so you have to go back again and revalidate. And that's the other question, is how far do you go back to revalidate that model? Does that have to always comply with version 1 when you're on version 10? So I think it's a bit like software, isn't it? That after a while, software companies abandon that support for version 3 because they just can't.
Yes, for old versions. And that's natural in the software development world. You're not gonna have support for Windows 98 anymore,
No,
because
exactly.
we're already in 2000. What do we have? Windows 10, 11, right? 11, everybody's like fearing changing to 11 because they already used to Windows 10. But yes, I guess it's like kind of, let's say, not philosophical, but just an industry question. Okay, how do you choose to do it? And you're totally right. For one-off projects, when you don't continuously use the model like you do for this, our example for diagnostics, you like continuously use it. Like, I don't know how many samples you run through it a week, but basically it makes sense to have this one slide every week and check if it's working. For one-off projects, you will have to do it every time.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing about chemistry slides is they do fade over time. So at some point, we'll probably have to refresh that test slide. But the other thing was that obviously, if you take a break in running that model, if you're running that model every week, the monitoring is quite easy because you're checking it and checking it and checking it. Whereas if you think, oh, we haven't used that model for 3 months, but we didn't do a QC check every week, this, even though we didn't get any samples in or something like that, that's when you start risking something unexpected happening, I suppose.
Would you still do the check every week, even if you didn't have samples?
I think you should. If you're
just to avoid this, like, oh, now 7 different things changed and it's not working after 3 months and we didn't check.
I think if you want,
I guess it's like maintenance of all your lab equipment.
That's right.
You have to do it periodically. You have to have in your SOPs, okay, how are you doing this? How often are you doing this? And if you don't do it often enough, then you're not compliant, and that's no good, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's the same. I mean, I would say that from our experience of that, making the model is actually quite easy. It's maintaining the model and making sure that that's running well. That's actually, having to write the whole SOPs and the whole workflow from start to finish and making sure
Yes,
you follow that.
because you're inventing this basically. There's not really anything that you can adjust.
No,
You have to
yeah.
search in
But it's
literature
great.
and
It's
invent
great.
it
It's
for the
just
lab.
there's a lot of things that maybe you overlook or maybe don't think about when you start the AI, and afterward you think, oh yeah, I think we need to do that. Yeah, I think we need to do that. And if I mean, some centres are very experienced, but I guess as a veterinary diagnostic company, not having not done AI, that was something that we've learned, through developing the model.
So how difficult was it integrating it into your workflow?
I think that's another critical aspect, and it goes back when people say, "What model shall I do?" and I always say, "How are you integrated?" So, obviously, particularly like something like cytology, the turnaround time is quite short. They really want it same day. So, if you're
Yes.
spending 8 hours trying to upload whole slide images to the cloud, that's going to delay your turnaround time. So certainly for us, our integration with Philips wasn't perfect. So we chose a model that we would normally expect 2 or 3 week turnaround time because we sent it away. So that was our choice because we knew that our integration wasn't quick. In an ideal situation, if you had something that was very quick and basically once scanned, went straight to the cloud overnight, the pathologist was reading it in the morning, you could have a model that, would satisfy your short turnaround time. So something like, I don't know, mitotic counter or, quantification of other objects or, a grader or something like that you needed a fast turnaround time. If you're scanning, say, the day before and your integration is fast and good and it maybe triage that sample, it's tagged and it's already gone to the cloud for analysis or on-prem analysis, then your turnaround time can be really short, which changes your idea of what model you can perform, if that makes sense. It's kind of chicken and the
You
egg.
need the results when you look at the slide.
That's right.
So then you work backwards. Okay, like you say, cytology. If I look at it digitally, then it would have to basically happen at the same time as it's being scanned.
Yeah.
And there are, depending on the company, the scanners, there are different integrations and where you can actually have this run on the slide while it's being scanned.
Right.
This is definitely a question to ask yourself. Do you need that? Can you have that? If you can, fantastic. How are you going to integrate? If you can't, what's the other way you can still leverage this?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, can you if your integration isn't fast or real time, can you offset the results or can you not? Because if you can't offset the reporting of those results, then you need something quicker, don't you? So I think it has a major impact on which model you're thinking of designing, how it fits in with your workflow. And I think that's something quite critical to consider before you go ahead with doing a model, because you could say, okay, we want a melanoma model that will grade it for us, but we can't get the results for 24 hours. Well, that's not, your clients aren't going to be very happy, are they? So I think it has a really, to me, integration is critical. And I think, in some instances, it could be improved, or having better integration between AI platforms or image viewers, or, the market's quite heterogeneous at the moment, isn't it? With different scanning manufacturers, different viewing platforms. There's various applications where AI models can be integrated into viewing platforms as well. So at the moment, what I see it's quite an immature market, isn't it? That there's a lot of players, but there's not a lot of commonality. I think it's coming, isn't it? But there's a lot of choices around, and you can do. Yes, I can use that model on that platform to do that one, but on that platform, I can't use that one. And I think pathologists just want everything in one spot, don't they? They want to click a button and it's there. They don't want to go into.
Yes, right. Yeah. And then you basically choose what you need for this. Actually, no, ideally, it should only show you what you need for this.
Yes.
You should not be able to, you should not need to click anything unnecessarily. It should like know your workflow, whatever, like Chi67, that should be there, nothing else.
So in an ideal,
yes, right?
Yeah, we're not, and maybe not quite there
So
yet. It would be great if you could.
Yeah, and there's a lot of questions that you have to, a lot of workflow analysis and a lot of questions that you have to ask yourself to be able to have that that is kind of in line with how the pathologists work, that it doesn't slow them down and it still satisfies the timelines, the turnaround times that you are expected to meet.
Yeah.
So do you see any like trends in the integration, but also in the work of veterinary pathologists? Like, do you see any common direction, regardless, of the heterogeneity of tools that everybody is using? And I think it's okay to be able to choose the tools you want for the reasons you want, but then it's never going to be the only tool in your lab. So the integration is critical. Like whichever one you choose, it has to work with the equipment that you already have.
That's right. So I think the flexibility of integration is important. So, I mean, certainly my work with Aiforia, we have quite a lot of different types of integration because the systems are so varied. Obviously we have an integrations development department as well. So, and I link with them quite a lot because I've obviously worked with them with the fin side, and so there's quite a few different tools. You've got APIs, you've got bridge connectors, so there are very different ways of getting those very large whole slide images data, up to a cloud platform. I mean, obviously you can use it locally, but that also has issues, doesn't it, about infrastructure updates and running it locally and all that sort of stuff. Whereas, cloud is kind of run for you unless you're unless you're you're in the US and Azure goes down like it has recently. That was quite catastrophic for many companies, wasn't it?
Yes, that was actually this week.
Yeah,
all the computers down.
Yeah. So that
wasn't interesting. That was the day that computers stopped working.
Yes, that's the one. The day the world ended. But so and I mean certainly trends that I've seen I would say in veterinary diagnostic pathology rather than obviously pre-clin tox pass things like that, because they've been using that for quite a while. But I still think it's in quite a preliminary stage in veterinary diagnostics. And I'm not sure quite
what would
why
you use it for, or like what would you recommend using AI for?
I think, certainly the way I think the market's gone, as I see it, is that a lot of the now adoption of AI in VetPath is low-hanging fruit, as it were. So the tasks that are easy enough to implement that are very time-consuming. So I think a lot of it is things like fluid countings. So, urine analysis has gone AI. Companies are doing on-prem AI analyzers now that actually scan it on site. Because that's the other issue with veterinary diagnostics is couriers and postage. The main delay is getting that sample to the lab. So as I see it, a lot of these on-site scanners, that's going to change the field quite a lot, I think. So I've seen obviously things like urine cytology, ear cytology is going sort of AI on-prem as well. Yeah, so obviously that I think from what I understand, you can either get a pathologist to look at it or you can get AI to look at it, or both. So basically
you scan wherever the sample is made and then the digital image is going, you don't need to send it anymore, right?
Yeah, that's right. So I suspect that's going to be the way that we're going to reduce turnaround times, and also, I guess, costs long term, because you're not going to have to be employing the postal system where it gets lost or damaged, or couriers. You're adding, at least sort of, I guess, 4 to 24 hours for that sample to even reach the external laboratory. So I think, on-prem scanning and then AI, implementing that is probably certainly the major direction that path is probably going to be going into. And then that opens up the possibility of cytology AI, because obviously that doesn't need any special equipment. But also, I'm involved in another group
in the clinic.
There's another group I'm involved in called Muse Microscopy, and they're using UV light or tissue autofluorescence. So obviously,
you know who I had on the podcast? I had Dr. Richard Levinson, and this technology came out of his lab. And I was like, oh, this is so cool. And now I know that a Smart Health DX is actually validating it with veterinary pathologists, and you're one of the pathologists. That is exciting. So, how do you like it?
Yeah, I can't. I have an NDA, so I can't talk.
Okay, let's not talk about it. But basically, it's direct to digital. So once you have digital image, you can do whatever you would do with a digital image anyway, right?
Yeah. So the options are, because obviously that would be is an on-prem scanner. So obviously using UV light to fluoresce the tissues, and then gaining those digital images from that without having to go through the normal histopath process. So removing the water and replacing it with paraffin wax and formalin fixation and things like that. You're obviously skipping
this
that.
Is like at least 8 hours process, right? I remember during my residency we had to switch it on the day we were leaving, like in the afternoon, and then so that the histotech in the morning could start working on it. And I remember a couple of times forgetting to do this, and then I had to drive back to the lab in the middle of the night and then send an email, hi, I forgot, you don't need to be there at 6 a.m.
So you haven't got that. So you've cut the processing time, and you've cut the courier delivery time. So if that's a valid option, that could be a direction where you've got on-prem scanning of
this direct to digital scanning.
And then you can do AI.
Then you don't need the equipment. I mean, probably maybe for some samples you still need it. There is going to be a transition period, but this is like the main disadvantage or pushback that I hear from people who are like, you know what, we're not going to do digital pathology because it's basically like scanning your printed photos.
That's
adding the step of digitization on top of analog. When it's direct to digital, then we're going to consider. So that's why I was so excited to have Richard Levinson on the podcast, and he was talking about different direct to digital technologies, but this particular one is mature enough that they already have a device and there are studies going on.
Because obviously
they are starting in veterinary medicine, and then they want to expand to human medicine as well.
Yes, and also it brings up the topic of AI-based staining as well. So you can cut using fluorescence to give you your light, basically, aren't you? But then you're using AI to actually make an H&E for you out of that, instead of having to go through the whole process of staining for H&E. So I think those sort of ideas are going to progress, and that's going to have a bearing on AI, because certainly doing some multi-channel fluorescent stuff, you look at that, and developing models for that, and you think, God, I wish I had multi-channel in my immunofluorescence in my diagnostics, because I could say that that's a CD8 positive, T cell, and that CD. It would be fantastic. I know it's slow and it's extremely costly. But those sort of things would be absolutely fantastic in routine diagnostics. But so I can only see those sort of technologies really progressing quite nicely, and that allows for, faster turnaround times, and I suspect the adoption of AI following those improvements will be even greater.
So when people hear that you're doing AI and you start talking about AI, what are the 3 most frequently asked questions that they ask?
Yeah.
And what are the 3 questions that they should actually be asking?
Well, number one, and I know these have come up in your previous webinars, is it going to take over pathologists' jobs? And that's always the one. And I think, and I've had that when we were trying to roll out the AI at Finn pathologists. Obviously, people were worried. It's like, well, are you doing this so that you can get rid of us? And it's a legitimate question. I think the thing with pathology is that the amount of work that we're expected to do is going up, and the number of pathologists that are actually available to do the work is going down. And I think that's permanent. That's across the board, I think, isn't it? We're not.
Yeah, it's across the board in all medical specialties. It's basically you don't have enough doctors. And in the US, you have like this tiered system of healthcare professionals where you have like registered nurses and assistants, and like you kind of build up so that not only the like most rare person, the doctor, can actually help patients. There are different things where different people can help with them, but still it's not only doctors, it's like healthcare professionals. It's a tough profession.
Yeah. So I guess that's one. The main question is, we want to do AI, but we don't know what model to do. And I think that the question is, what's going to be most useful to you and how does it fit in with your workflow is usually the answer. What's going to improve your pathologist's workflow? What's going to help them make a decision quicker and more easily? I think those are the concepts that you need to look at. What your pathologists are doing, how can we improve what they're doing? The easiest, maybe choose the low hanging fruits first. Don't go to some mega model that's highly complex. Choose things that are going to have the most impact and the most improvements. And the other thing is that can you use this model? If this works in a dog, can I use it in a cat? And you think, well, potentially, yes, you can. It just depends how similar that lesion or that tissue is. So that kind of goes back to the transfer learning. If you've got a mitotic indicator that you've modeled for human pathology, there's probably no reason why you can't transfer that to an animal model, because mitotic figures, as long as the staining in the tissues are very similar, mitoses look like mitoses, don't they? Whether they're in human or animal tissue.
And the project described in the literature, there have been there are always those image analysis challenges, like the chameleon challenge that was detecting metastasis in lymph node. There was also one that was called MyDog, and it was mitosis detection. And they had a data set with both animal and human tissues, exactly for that reason, because mitosis is mitosis, and it doesn't really matter which cell it affects or which cell it is within. It looks similar.
So yeah, that they would probably the biggest questions. I guess the other questions they should be asking, kind of just to reiterate,
what should they ask instead?
What do I need to do before I start doing the AI? So again, just covering, you need to get your workflow before you do the AI nailed down. You need to get your quality control of your material good, and if you can get everything's nice and consistent, then the performance of that model will be much better, and you won't have to maybe train as much, spend so much time annotating, that sort of thing. So that would be one. And also the limitations of AI. I think everybody thinks it's a magic bullet, but there are times when you're modeling and you can't quite get it to work well because of certain constraints. So it's not perfect. And some people go, "Oh, can you make me a grader?" And you think, a pathologist can do this quite easily, but actually to implement that in AI is more of a challenge. It's not as easy as you think. So, and again, some of these mega models that you've got so many criteria, it becomes more laborious and more difficult. And I think some of these things is keep it simple, stupid. You know, have a workflow where you say, is this a tumor, is this not? And then you have a model that does tumor and does inflammation because you've separated the two, rather than having it all built into one massive mega model that's, you know, quite complex and difficult to maintain. You can have more of a workflow based model, so you have sequential model running rather than one big one, you know. So I always think keep it simple, stupid is a good analogy, you know, in those sort of things where you can sometimes overcomplicate things, trying to make it do the job of, you know, 10 people, you know, that sort of thing. So that would be the other one. And obviously things about people are very concerned about privacy and security. And I think the beauty about AI is that a lot of it is de-identified. I mean, you can't identify someone from a digitized image of a biopsy. You know, if I took a piece of biopsy from your skin and processed it and digitized it, I couldn't tell it was yours because I don't have the genetic data. And if there's no metadata in there, there is no identifiers, and it's de-identified tissue, then you know, there's no link, is there? The only link is that identifier that links your limb system data to the image. So in that sense, it's quite, I would say it's more secure than a slide that has, could even have the barcode or the name on it or whatever, you know. So that's one, I think privacy and security is always, especially when it's stored on the cloud and things like that, is obviously one concern. And it's legitimate, but as long as you've de-identified that, then, you know, you've done all you can, especially going back to your previous material on GDPR and things like that. That sort of ties in, doesn't it? But and the other thing, the other topic that comes up is who owns that WSI, because it's a digital image. It's not tissue. It's an image taken of the tissue. So I'm not sure if that's really being clarified, particularly as, like, you know, ownership of
Yes.
that
So
material.
in the US, it depends on the state. I don't know what's the situation you're in veterinary diagnostic in your company.
We have, it's relatively unregulated. I think regulation is going to come from what I can see, but at the moment it's unregulated. So it's unclear as to ownership of a digital image. I mean, the ownership of the tissue is another factor that we've been through previously. It's like, you know, there was a issue quite a few years ago about post-mortem materials. Obviously, that was reflected when we had problems with human material being stored, and the owners weren't, or the owners, the family weren't, you know, aware of pieces of tissue being stored for science and research purposes. And that changed quite a lot. And then we had that certainly bounced into the veterinary industry as well, as to, you know, ownership of tissues and things like that. But then you've got the next factor is who owns the digital image or digital photograph of that tissue. That's another issue, I suspect. That's
yeah, I think it's gonna be, there has been a debate. I think there's gonna be, the more of these tools based on those images is being implemented, the bigger the necessity to clarify what are the legal and ethical guidelines for using them, right? But it's it's across the digital health spectrum, across all things digital health, because digital data is generated that there was not there before. And so nobody would ask this question. Like you say, tissue is a physical thing that people already ask questions about, but what about the other things? Okay, so anything else that you would want to add or anything that I didn't ask that I
No,
should have asked?
I think I've probably waffled on for
We
long enough.
covered. We covered quite some topics. So, if the listeners want to start integrating AI image analysis algorithms in their diagnostic workflows, what's the best way to start? So, what would you recommend they do?
I think, look at how is this going to integrate into your workflow? How AI digitized, because obviously it depends on that. So that would be the first step. The second step is, do you think you can integrate with the company that you want to choose to use? And then how easy is that? Then obviously in-house, you need to decide, what's going to be most useful to implement in an AI fashion. So what models initially are, not necessarily the stuff that's really cool looking. What's going to be most useful? What's going to reduce your turnaround time, pathologist fatigue, more consistency? I don't think it's about replacing staff. It's more about helping, or it should be about helping staff do the perhaps more mundane things that they can do very easily, and then the human is left to do the more difficult and very subjective things that require a much more informed decision and more experience based. So those are the things I would probably recommend to think about, before you approach AI. But also don't be scared of AI. It's not a magic bullet, but it's extremely useful, and it can do most things. But yeah, I think it's about working together with your company to develop that model that's going to be most useful to you.
And if anybody wants to see how the Aiforia platform works, what kind of models you can do in collaboration with them, or if you have the capacity to do it on your own, and there's an option to do that as well. So I'm going to link to a form to contact the Aiforia team. Richard, is it okay if I include your email as well in the show notes?
Yeah.
Okay, so if anybody wants to directly talk to Richard about it, there's going to be his email in the show notes, in the description, wherever you're going to be consuming this podcast. Thank you so much for joining me, Richard. No problem. It was a pleasure to have you on the show.
It's great to chat.
And I wish you a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for staying till the end. It means you are a real digital pathology trailblazer. Aiforia has been with Digital Pathology Place since the very beginning. They have sponsored a lot of educational videos. I interviewed amazing guests who used this platform for their really cutting edge research, and I'm going to link to all this content below. And if you would like to learn more about Aiforia and see if this is a good fit for your AI needs, be sure to fill the form below, and then me or somebody from the Aiforia team is going to get in touch with you, walk you through the platform, and check if this is the best way for you to leverage AI. And I talk to you in the next episode. Thank you.